I dropped from 23.1% body fat to 3.7% body fat. The hardest thing in the beginning was actually I had to do less. Whoa, 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 whoa. It wasn't no unbreakable.
In order to become unbreakable, you need to rethink everything that you thought you knew about physical fitness, about upgrading your body, your systems, and really what's in between your ears, your mind. Those 6 inches between your head, between your ears, matter so much more than you probably realize. We're going to be talking today about radical transformations. If you've been trying to lose weight, if you've been trying to get fit, if you've been trying to take your life back from big pharma, big food, and the things that have been slowly eroding you, both on the physical as well as mental level, that's all going to change today. Paul Mahoney is not just an expert in business and other areas of things, but he's recently become an expert in body transformation and also someone that I can call a friend. Paul, welcome to Unbreakable.
Thank you, George. Thanks for having me.
So I was inspired. I'll just tell the story a little bit. We went out to lunch, or it was dinner. I can't remember. After a mastermind meeting, and saw these pictures you pulled up on your phone because I noticed your arms had gotten a little bit bigger. Like you looked a little more fit. You looked healthier. Like your skin was looking good. I was like, hey man, what you been doing? And you pulled out your pictures of your phone, and I was completely shocked. I'm like, that's the most amazing Photoshop job I've ever seen. Or AI is awesome. Like talk about radical transformations. Like just load yourself into AI and turn yourself into a superhero. But it wasn't AI, it was real. And you told us a story of the other people that were sitting at the table with us that you'd been on this health journey for 6 years or more, trying to change so much about what's going on inside your body and through and through, because you do a lot of traveling, you do a lot of speaking engagements and things like that, and that's very wearing and a lot of wear and tear on the body. And you couldn't get the results over years that you got in the results for weeks for this new process that you went through. And I'd love for you to maybe just dig into that a little bit. Like, first off, can we do this? Can you
Yeah.
show people the transformation? I want people to see what I saw and the reason why you're here with us today.
Okay. Yeah, let's start with that. I'll do a screen share. So I don't know how much background you want to give before I get into the pictures, or just lay them
As
out.
as much as necessary. Yeah, I think it's
Yeah.
fine.
Okay. So what you're seeing here is photos. Well, I've actually three photos taken of myself on September 2024. So quite recently. I jumped on the Omron to check my body fat, which was 23.1%. And you might call it a dad bod. You might call it 6 months pregnant. Kind of depends on what way you want to look at it. But the reason I'm taking that is not because I don't think this is a typical before picture. And George has already kind of hinted at this, but I don't believe it's a typical one in that this really should be my after photo shoot, because at this point in my life, I had been jogging every day for almost 8 years. I hadn't touched sugar in 5.5 years. Not only that, I stopped all bread. I stopped all forms of cheese. So sugar, cheese, bread. I had given up French fries for 2 years. I've been in the gym every day for 2 years. I had taken cold showers for I think 3.5 years in a row, and I mean without missing a day. I don't mean just I've been doing it for years. I had not missed a single day. We'll get back to how I can prove all of that in due course. And I felt inauthentic in my message because how I looked was definitely, I felt, not representative of what I was doing. And I'm speaking in terms of the people that follow me, my audience, etc., at the Rethink Academy. So it was a very important day for me, because the reason I took that picture was because I was about to start a new program. I had attempted to start it the previous April, and literally on day one, I went over on my ankle and I sprained it massively and I couldn't start. So this time I was kind of prepared. I was like, this is my before shot. And then exactly 7 months later, you'll see the picture on the right hand side. So I dropped from 23.1% body fat to 3.7% body fat. And that shot was taken on the 4th of April, 2025. So yeah, almost not just 20% of my body fat down. I mean, 20% as a real number dropped down to 3.7. My weight was at the lowest it's been in as long as I've been weighing myself. And quite simply, I couldn't quite believe it because the transformation was so ridiculous that I ended up winning competitions. People literally were saying, you know, you could go onto the cover of a magazine, and that was kind of hilarious to me because I genuinely didn't even believe it was in my genetic makeup that I could look like that sort of picture that you always assumed is photoshopped or touched up. And yes, I do have a tan in the picture on the right, and that is very much a fake tan. We do not get that amount of sun in Ireland ever. So that did come out of a spray uh bottle. So that's the only thing fake I would say about it.
Wow. That was so 7 months.
Yeah,
This all transformation happened in 7 months,
yeah,
which is amazing. What was one of the things that when you started going, well, we'll get into where this all came from in a
yeah.
moment, but what was one of the hardest things that you had to overcome or change or habits when you first got started with this that maybe you didn't realize?
The hardest thing in the beginning was actually I had to do less of what I was doing. It was so counterintuitive. And what I mean by that is, especially when I've been running every day for 8, 9 years, the first thing that my instructor told me when I got to tell him what I did was that, okay, man, you got to reduce your cardio down. Like you got to get that down to at least somewhere below 20 minutes because your body has become so dependent on you running every day that it's actually lost all its benefit for you. You know, you start to pile on the weight unless you keep it up. So that was one big thing for me. And also I had to spend less time in the gym that I was spending. He said, if you're ever longer in the gym than 1 hour, it's too long. So those two were huge for me because they were so counterintuitive, as I say, totally against what I had thought. And then the third element was I really needed to dial in my diet, right? And that, to be honest, is the biggest of all. Is uh and if I'll tell you about one specific part of my diet, I'd been doing, and I haven't mentioned this yet, I'd been doing intermittent fasting for 6 years because that was meant to be the answer. And I still looked the way I looked on the left there. Um, and the new instruction was I had to be eating within an hour of waking in the morning. So that was really difficult for me because I hadn't eaten before noon in 6 years. And suddenly I had to be eating before 8 a.m. And honestly, I almost felt physically sick the first couple of times I was doing it to start having breakfast at that time of the morning.
Hmm. Why do you think that, well, let me ask you before I ask that question, what have you tried in the past? Because you talked about intermittent fasting. I think there's a lot of people that are listening and watching right now that have tried lots of things to go through a health transformation in their own life. What have you tried that didn't work?
Well, what I find interesting is even with all of the compounded things that I was doing, like jogging every day, like going to the gym every day for a couple of years, like um, cold showers, which, you know, Gary Brecka was saying is by far the most effective way of losing fat quickly. I'm talking, I was swimming in ice lakes near my home. Like I was, this wasn't just dipping in the cold shower for 20 seconds. I was going all in on these things. I did water fasting for, I think the longest I got to was 8 days. I would have tried that annually. Definitely I would have dropped weight over that period, but then it would have come back on. Um, I mean, I'm a huge learner, George. I'm always listening, so I'm always listening to podcasts. I don't just take anything at face value. I'm going to test it out on myself first, and that's actually how I got into habits in the first place when I started jogging. Was that I was speaking at an event and Robin Sharma was on before me, and he talked about, first time I'd heard about this idea of it taking a minimum of 67 days to create a new habit. And that's when I said, right, I want to implement health habits in my life that will create a new outcome for me. So I said, well, what better to do than jogging every day? Let's start with that. So that was the first one. And then I incrementally started adding these things over time. Some were supplemented, so they were added in, and others were taken out. Like I said, various aspects of the diet, like taking out sugar, taking out bread, taking out cheese, um, calorie counting, um, int- God, I would say I didn't do the Atkins. That's one thing I didn't do. I didn't do keto. I didn't do that either. But I mean, bar those, I was pretty much giving everything else a go, and I mean properly giving it a go. Like really trying to create a habit out of it, and give it its best potential opportunity to create a result on me. And I was starting to think I was the problem. You know, that it was my genetic makeup or whatever it might be.
Yeah, I think that's where a lot of people give up. By the way, you can probably stop the screen share there if you
Okay,
want to,
sure.
so everyone can see you clearly. I think a lot of people stop before they actually get the result. Why do you think that is?
Um, well, what I find interesting is, you know, when you're starting something new, you're probably after seeing something that's inspired you, right? So there's a before shot and an after shot. And what I have found even myself, because I become really attached. When I got into this shape, I was actually surprised at myself at how attached I was to that shape and the significance I had of being in that shape, and then I didn't like seeing not looking like that all the time. But what I notice is that even as I share these results with people in my own team, all they see is the after shot, right? And they're looking at their before shot and they're looking at my after shot. And I think why people give up too soon is what they haven't seen. And I actually make a point of sharing this now, is the picture of how the body transformed week on week. And it's quite incredible, actually. Even looking back, if you pick any two random weeks, you cannot see any progress between the weeks. You look exactly the same as the week before. So when you're living that out in real time, and you're taking one photograph of yourself every week, and you go, what is the point? I literally look exactly the same, or I'm exactly the same weight as I was last week. If you're using the measuring scale as your measure of success, um, these are exactly the traps that you'll get caught in. Females, especially on the weighing scales, because you do not lose weight the same way as men do, where men are quite fortunate in that the scales do drop. But for women, it can take a lot longer. Even though they're getting tighter, their shape is improving, the weighing scales tell a different story, and they can lose interest when they see that happening. Uh, and also, there's always this noise in the background, George, as I'm sure you're very aware of, like things like Ozempic or whatever the latest, quickest, less work that needs to be done that someone is taking, that you're like, well, maybe I should just do that, right? And when, you know, deep within you, you're like, okay, I could, but I know I'll have so much more satisfaction if I actually go and become the person that it takes to get into this shape, because you know that require discipline, it requires some hard work, but it'll also give you pride, it'll give you something to share that truly you can own. You know, it's almost like not winning the lotto, but earning your right to that amount of money, for example. That's when you get to keep the shape. That's when it's not a surprise, or you don't feel guilty about it.
You've always been someone that people look up to as it comes to inspiration, and people come to listen to your lectures and your speaking engagements, from all over the world. What changed in your mental mindset when you got to see yourself in that new transformed state? Like you said, about it gives people confidence to maybe do, other things. Like for someone who's already a high achiever, like how did that affect you?
Much more than I actually ever realized. Especially when I go back and look at pictures or videos of myself on screen, and I see the body, the shape, and what I'm saying, and they just don't seem to be integrated. Like where I'm talking about habits, the power of habits, it changes your life. Da, 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 da. Look at me, I've world records for this amount of time I'm doing this, but the physical representation didn't align. So when it did, something within me felt like, and I wasn't aware of it at the time, George, actually, but it was like when it happened, I suddenly gave myself permission to broadcast my story and what I do, and not just about health. I mean, all the other stuff. Uh, I was ready to let my personal brand grow, because it almost felt for years, without actually realizing, and I didn't verbalize it until it happened, that there seemed within me a level of inauthenticity between the message and the messenger, because I didn't look the part of what I was preaching. And it was always, I was aware of it, but I didn't realize how much that was holding me back in terms of that whole idea where people just don't fully believe that they'll be accepted or that they're good enough. And I know you've had Rory Kilmartin come on speaking about the various archetypes. As a strong fox, that's a huge part of me, is that I'm never enough, right? So that was always holding me back. And the physical appearance was definitely one of those things that were like, well, I don't know if I'm good enough because I don't look the part of what I'm actually preaching. And what's funny, George, actually, when I show my picture, when I'm on stage and I go, so who is he? Who am I? I actually have my white head, um, very poorly photoshopped on a bodybuilder's body, like tanned, dark brown. And it was only more recently when I looked, I was like, oh my God, I've actually transformed. Like, and it would always get a good laugh, right? People would always laugh at, oh yeah, like as in that's what I actually look like. To then realizing that, all along, that I guess the longer I looked at that, the more it became a reality for me, to go from it being something that I was publicly joking at my own physical appearance so that other people wouldn't make the joke for me. um Now it's been able to kind of align that to, well, yeah, I still use the picture, but now it's actually something that I can be proud of, I guess, rather than just being making things about myself so other people won't do it for me.
A lot of people do this vision board exercise, right? Where they put things up that they want, like the house, the car, the body, the girlfriend or wife, that they want, the drum set or the guitar that they've always wanted to buy. And they say that if they look at that enough, you will attract that into your life. How much of that do you think was happening as you were making, self-deprecating jokes on stage about that? Or do you think that there's anything about that law of attraction thing that's kind of bled into this? Or maybe it was just a motivation thing for you, like you got tired of being inauthentic. I'm curious as to if
Yeah,
you
no, it's a
thought any
great
of that led
question.
to it.
It's a combination of the above. I'm a huge believer in vision boards, actually. I set my first one up in 2008, not long after the release of The Secret. It was very much John Assaraf's part where he talked about the house, and one day he pulled out the vision board and realized he was within that house. That it just totally fascinated me, that even if I didn't fully believe it at the time, I just felt, well, what if he is right? And what if he's only partially right? Maybe it was just in the neighborhood. I want to give this a go. So I actually had a picture of a guy from an Abercrombie ad of like the perfect kind of six pack. um, I had a picture of a wife and two children. I had a picture of $1 billion note. I had a picture of me speaking in front of 10,000 people at a time. Um, Everything everything bar the health thing, I had nailed. I had mastered, because what I did worked, right? But the health one was the one that just really bothered me, because I've put so much time, effort, money, supplements. Jesus, I must have, like Dave Asprey talks about the most expensive urine in the world. I wasn't too far behind him in terms of, what I was taking, um, to give myself an edge. But even with all that, and even with that vision board, that was the one thing I didn't crack. So that for me really bothered me. But I knew, the whole premise of what I live by is this rethinking. It's, if you're not happy with the results that you have, you need to think again. You're following some sort of protocol that you think is the right one to follow. So you got to rethink it. If you're not getting the results, there's something about what you're doing that isn't correct. And it's funny that I found it way easier to make millions of dollars. I found it much easier to meet my partner, to build businesses, to scale on what the Hawkins scale of in the book Power versus Force, the scale of consciousness. All these things I found ways to crack, and just this health one had just had bothered me. So it was always like, when you say nagging in the background, I mean, it literally is behind me. My vision board, I've always kept just behind me there, so every time I step away from the desk, it sits on the behind me. So I always saw that six pack as like definitely some kind of inspiration, I would say, but at the same time it was nagging me. It was like, why haven't I cracked this one at this stage?
Do you upgrade your vision board to put a
um
bigger house, a bigger family, a
it's a fair
bigger
question.
check, $1 trillion bill?
um I haven't, actually. And it is something that like I upgraded it online, like on Google Sheets, but I never printed it out. And I have my own reasons for that. But I didn't fully understand why that was, until more recently when I was playing with the whole idea of the scale of consciousness, that I just talked about, where I think after a certain point, when you've set your goals, you set your targets, and you really nail this idea, set it, hit it, target, exceed it, next one. Um, Personally, at this point in my life, I feel like happiness for me isn't about what I can gain or what I can have or what I can get. It's actually moving beyond the need for something that I don't have now. Right? I've happily come to a point of disconnecting from, oh, I'll be so much happier if I can get to this vision of what I think my life should be. I'm very happy in the place where I am now of, okay, I'm here now, I'm happy now. I'm here now, I'm happy now. And I remind myself that multiple times per day. So I think it's at a certain level on the scale that going beyond goal setting is where you get a sense of fulfillment and a sense of happiness at where you are at the moment, rather than a constant sense of striving. I heard people talk about that, and I go, that's nonsense. Let me be rich first, and then I'll
Then figure it
then
out,
I'll
right?
see. But it's a very, I find it a very healthy way of living, because I have a lot of friends who it genuinely doesn't matter um how much they have in any area in life. It's the next one. Okay, yeah, I know I have a billion, but what's, let's add a zero, or whatever that might be. But fortunately, with health and body fat and those kind of things, it's you can only go so low. But I do also see people that are, now you got to pack it on. Now you got to get bigger, and you got to bulk, and so on. But um it's trying to create that disconnect between the sense of significance you have by having something, and just being enjoying what you have and sharing that insight with others, is kind of where I'm at the moment. I'm not saying I won't disagree from this 10 years from now. It's quite possible that I will.
It's interesting. Um, do you see dangers in, or what dangers do you see in how people assess their personal value to the world in the things that they've achieved or things that they have, stuff around them, or their own, like looking in the mirror and saying, is this the person who I want to be, whether they are or they're not? I mean, do you see any dangers around using that as a way of valuing yourself?
I would say it's a double-edged sword. Um, it depends on where your starting point is. I think goals, a sense of significance, winning at the game of money, winning at the game of business, the winning at the game of relationships. Um, I think you earn the right to step away from the game when you've played the game enough to a point where you think, okay, I've mastered this. I get it. I can do it. And I've achieved a genuine sense of accomplishment. I was actually only listening to Naval Ravikant talk about something similar to this morning, where he said, you know, you still want to play the computer game to get to a level where you've mastered the game, and then you move on from it. And I thought that was a very good way of putting it. It's like just because it's a game where you can reach the top level, does that mean you don't play the game at all because there's an end in sight? And I like that idea. If you do view it all as, okay, a game that you can master, or like I look at the 8 games that you can play in relationships, earnings, Tao, health, investing, networks, knowledge, and fun. Um, I think to get and to set yourself those targets to go and do that, I think is very meaningful. I'll never forget when you talk about the mirror. I'll never forget when I went to Tony Robbins in 2009 to UPW. Um, the first night I looked in the mirror in the bathroom, and I did not recognize the person looking back at me. It was the freakiest experience. I was like, I'm looking at it. I can see someone looking back at me, but this doesn't look like me. Whatever that switch was, whatever that thing that had gone off in me, because I literally handed in my notice to my job on that night. Um, so I think you can always create the image of who you think you're looking at. I think you have that power within you to create what it is that you want to look back at, and if that's something that you're proud of, or if that's somebody that you're not proud. I think it's okay not to be proud of where you're at the moment. I think it's okay to be upset with the fact that you don't have the results that you'd like to have at this point, if you put that together and use it as a kind of a fertilizer to grow from there, right? Use the BS. Some people say BS is for bullshit. I said, I prefer to say belief systems, right? So a lot of people spend their time just thinking of BS, and others use it as fertilizer to grow. So it's if you can use upset that you see in the mirror to drive you, I think it's worth it. But I think you do need to know when the end of that game is in sight. That, if you're just going to play the comparison game forever, and you hear some of the big podcasters like Chris Williamson and Stephen Bartlett talk about this, is, if now you're just comparing, well, how many views does this guy get versus me, or how much money does that person have versus me, I think it can become unhealthy. And we all have friends who are very wealthy and not the happiest in the world, but we also have friends that don't have a lot of money are unhappy too. So it's knowing in advance that there is going to be a time when you realize there's always going to be somebody fitter, somebody more wealthy, somebody more knowledgeable. And I appreciated that many, many years ago, when I just became very content with the idea that I'm never going to be the best at anything. Um, but what I'm going to do is seek out the best and introduce the best people to the people who want to meet them. And I became very comfortable with that, saying, okay, well, I'll be the guinea pig. I'll test it on myself. And if it works, I'll share it. If it doesn't, I won't. Um, and that gave me fulfillment and going, well, I like that place. So I'm not trying to compare myself to where I see myself versus somebody else. And that took a lot of time. Geez, that's it took a long time to get what would you say? I was institutionalized from corporate world for 10 years, like Shawshank Redemption. When you're released, it took a long time to go from that competitive nature of always one-upmanship on everybody else to, it doesn't have to be that way.
We're going to get to the protocols here a little bit later in our discussion process, just for everyone who's listening, saying like, show me the results. How did you get there? But I think what we're talking about is really, really important, because I think it sets a strong foundation for what you do afterwards. And so you don't also slip into like narcissistic tendencies and things like that, because like that value proposition of am I now worthy, and those things, like these are very important things to talk about. But do you think we're living in a simulation? You talked about playing the game
Yeah.
and having multiple games. I'd love to get your take on that.
I mean, the cop out is to say that people a lot smarter than me certainly believe that is the case. I'm not a gamer per se, but where I am now in the evolution of my business is kind of interesting. Like the mastermind that are kind of, is it yeah, it's a mastermind, I guess. But what I'm seeking now is, how do I go beyond the game as I see it, right? So for, at the risk of people think I'm completely crackers, but I'm way more interested now with how do I spend a portion of my day coming completely from a place of insight, intuition, and kind of universal consciousness. And I'm learning how to tap into how to view things from here rather than from here, and how to be able to do something called arcing, which allows you to kind of tap into these uh, much deeper forms of consciousness where all the answers are there, where all the creativity comes from. Um, so do you think do you consider that a simulation? Well, if all that is going on behind the scenes, I mean, what else would you call this but a simulation? And I think, even with everything that we're experiencing today in terms of modern wisdom, if you go back and read any of the books from thousands and thousands of years ago, and even the language that we use today, um, for like the reality, where it's basically like the veil, right? The veil of consciousness. And even prayers, depends on what religions you. I've had the privilege of studying 230 different religions with John D. Martini in his Empyrean course, and that took me from a non-believer, angry, anti-religion type person to having a massive appreciation as a marketer as to what they were doing and how they did it in a world when we didn't have anything bar a pulpit to share a message from. It all seems to come back to talking about this greater game that's going on, that's been orchestrated from behind the scenes, and it's hard to see it any other any other way. And even will I talk about this? Well, I guess so. But I'm very lucky to be have access to all of the recordings of a particular gentleman who was known as Yahweh, or as the teacher, who's been around from the mid 80s, and recently his the person who channeled him passed away, Chuck. But I've access to all of his materials, and when he just, whoever that person is or whatever you're accessing, is definitely a completely different level of consciousness and knowledge to what we see and read every day. But that would also seem to lean into that same space of this being nothing more than a simulation. But it doesn't mean it's not a game worth playing, right? At the end of the day, what's the alternative? That this is base reality, and what are the chances? The chances of that happening do seem to be way less likely than the fact that this is probably just some form of simulation, especially when we go into a different form of simulation at nighttime, and a different form of simulation in a near-death experience. Which is real and which isn't, and who dictates what you truly believe to be your base reality. It's a tricky one.
Yeah.
But I'm never
Especially if
dismissive of anyone with an alternative view. I'm like, bring it on. Let's discuss this, because I've absolutely no proof or facts, bar my own subjective experiences. So like I'm wide open to having a conversation on it. But my 25-year-old wouldn't. Like, if the 25-year-old me was listening to me now, I would be so dismissive of me. Like, and that's the beauty of getting older, when you realize how little you know, or certainly how little I know, in the scheme of things.
Yeah, we play a different game, right? Like you were saying, like the things that in your early part of your life, there's different goals and different things that are more valuable to you that you try to achieve. And then later in life, it's a different thing. One of the things you mentioned before was we were talking about vision boards and growing, to the next level, the next house, and all these other things. Is what I find is when people hit a certain level in their business or in their personal development, once they've opened up that consciousness, instead of trying to get more, they release more and they go to less. They try to be better stewards of the environment. They start thinking about what kind of impact they're leaving on the world, not necessarily how big of a building they can create and put their name on it, and those types of things. And they pull people closer. The relationships become the most valuable thing that they have in their life, not the cars, not the franchises, the businesses, anything, land that they own. It's those other things, that fulfillment. And I think that's very powerful to know that the pendulum swings both ways, for people. Yeah, just depending on where you're at in that pendulum swing, just realize it's going to probably go the other way at some point in time, and prepare for it, you know.
Yeah, for sure. And I think if we can all have this healthy empathy for every other individual that you meet, that they're just another potential avenue of experiencing the same world, the same universe as us, that person literally has just as much right to have an opinion as you do, and you don't necessarily have to agree with it, but just to stop being so judgmental and opinionated and angry all the time, like as a lot of people are nowadays, and just say, oh, in a different world, in a different circumstance, in a different culture, that could have been me. um I think it allows for that a bit more. And to be fair, I'm also happy that my 25-year-old me would completely disagree with me, because if we're not changing as we acquire some more wisdom, I don't know, is any of it going in? Are we actually are we actually assimilating any of the information that's actually available for us to have new insights as we get older?
Hmm. It's interesting. I was listening to a Stephen Bartlett podcast yesterday at like maybe 2 o'clock in the morning, because I work late nights sometimes, and he was having an AI expert on there, and they made the metaphor of how dangerous what we're dealing with right now is with this whole AI game. And the guy said, if they were building a nuclear power plant in your backyard, right? And you had heard that they didn't have safety protocols, for that, and that, you live there, your family lives there, like you're talking about maybe a mile away from your residence, that you're trying to create a family and build a life there. And you went up to the person that's in charge, engineer, and said, so what kind of safety protocols are you putting in place? And they said, well, we're still trying to figure that out. We're not really sure yet. Would you want to stay there? Because it's not a safe place. Like, what's the chances of this thing blowing up and 10,000 years or 100,000 years later, the place will be habitable again? And that's kind of what we're dealing with this AI situation, and especially within the simulation, and so much that's unhealthy. People think that this AI stuff can be the ticket to humanity's evolution of curing all disease, really opening up expansive consciousness, and so many things, but can also go just the opposite. That's technology creep. Splitting the atom, unlimited energy, right? But also what else? Nuclear war. So many other things. What's your take on AI and its place, moving forward?
Oh, what a big question. Um, at a personal level, and even with my own students, um, I just invite them to be not drawn towards the shiny object syndrome. Like I think I guess both you and I, George, have been exposed to a lot of this, but um, it's brilliant at doing stuff that you were never going to do anyway. Like it's really great at that. So it can very quickly suck you in to do all of these things that you were not doing, which for me is just even more of a waste of time. And I'm big into time management, etc. So I ask people just think of it firstly as AI to stand for actions implemented, and this at a very basic level. Actions implemented. Does this help me implement the actions that I'm meant to be doing, and faster and more effectively and more productively? Great. Okay, well then use those tools. And if it doesn't meet that requirement, just cast it aside. Otherwise, you're going to continue go down to that rabbit hole of the latest and greatest version of yourself or whatever it might be. But so that's how I would apply personally and within businesses. Can I, actions implemented, bring in a virtual CFO, see what he has to say, get her what she has to say, get their advice. Fantastic for that. Bigger picture, I like to listen to both sides of the argument here. So I actually heard that podcast that you're talking about, Stephen. I like listening to Joe Rogan, and because he naturally brings in guests that argue both sides anyway. Um, and I would like to think, I'm probably more on the pessimistic side, but probably like 55-45, I would say, on the scale at the moment. Um, I do think if we are faced with kind of existential questions and, things are really coming to ahead, I like to think, I could be wrong, that we would pull together as a society and say, look, guys, um, that we would unify against that, that we will not push that button, that we won't take it too far. I've no proof that that will happen other than human nature, and that, if you're living in a neighborhood, you're going to be at war with your neighbors until suddenly you take on the next town in a sporting event, and suddenly you and your neighbors are on the same team, and all the way up to villages, to cities, to countries, to continents, to the Ryder Cup, to, okay, if and I think it was Ronald Reagan talked about years ago, if we want to unite the world, we got to have an external threat like aliens. And maybe AI will have that effect on us, that if it does get to that point where we really start to uh lose empathy, lose control, probably more than anything, um start to lose awareness of our own creativity and the skill set, that I'd hope that we can take a step back. um but that's nothing but hopium, and that's the reality I'm choosing to live in at the moment with that.
Yeah.
I
Well,
do
that's been
still look back
legalized
at,
recently, hopium. It's no longer in the United States. It's been marijuana, and now it's hopium. You know.
yeah, true. But in saying all that, anytime I have a conversation with Claude or ChatGPT, I always ask how it is first, right, to my future overlords, to make sure I'm seen as one of the nice guys.
It's funny that we all joke about that, but how realistic that may become is interesting, because they used to say that what's on the internet stays on the internet, and kind of like what's in Vegas stays in Vegas. Well,
Yeah.
what you put in AI stays in AI, and it gets modeled against everything that you've ever searched for online, and it knows you better than you know yourself, or will at some point in time if they're not all connected yet. I mean, there's just so many data points. What you post on Facebook, and everything else. It's very interesting. Like pre-crime is becoming a thing now, and that used to be a movie. Like everything that was in a movie.
Yeah.
I'd love to put this out in your thoughts. I I so often compare the world that we live in, or have been living in over the last, say, 20 years, as technology has advanced, to Star Trek, because growing up I was a total nerd. I still nerd, but a Trekkie, and everything that they had in the Star Trek series, they they're happening. These things have been happening and unfolding from cell phones to replicators and food replicators, like all this amazing stuff. Now we have a starship called Starship, and we have all of these things. It's just a matter of time before Starfleet comes out, or whatever the scenario is. I'm wondering sometimes if that particular series wasn't inspired by some sort of prophetic vision as opposed to something else. But then going back to the simulation concept, if we're all watching Star Trek, are we all having a hand in this coming to be because we're putting energy and thought into these things manifesting?
Yeah, big question again. I mean, yeah, when I see Brian Johnson, the guy with you know, Don't Die, he just looks exactly like Data to me when I saw, from Star Trek: The Next Generation, and he's like the perfect android, literally verbatim, looks exactly like him. Um, I'm not. I would. There's a couple of ways that you hear people talk about this. Some think the government are actively leaking information that they're very aware of into public consciousness through Hollywood and sponsor them to go and release elements of the movies, like things like the Greys and alien abductions. All that stuff we're very aware of for decades, so that assuming that all becomes more publicly aware and public knowledge, the shock and awe won't be as great that if we'd never heard of these things. I don't think that's accidental, and the older I get, the more I think it's incident. It's purposely done. But then I also would be a huge believer in, and actually haven't personally done them, but people that do ayahuasca and iboga and these stuff. I no doubt that these guys get to access this higher level, whether you call it lower level of consciousness or higher level of consciousness, where they can tap into um, our future selves, our future technologies. If that everything has already happened, we're just in a particular part of it, and if we're in this particular bubble, this time warp, um, and that, yeah, I don't know if you've ever talked about the natty leaves or any of this stuff, but where you can pretty much go get a reading of exactly what's going to happen to you, what day you're going to die, etc., etc. I've decided not to find that out. I'd rather not know at the moment anyway. But that the story's already been written. So these people are, they were hailed as prophets in the old days when they were able to do it, and it's like, oh, look, they were correct. So why would we have completely lost that skill set? Yes, as out of 7.8 billion or 8 billion of us, most of us don't tap into it. But of course, some creatives and some creators that take time out and tap into a deeper sense of themselves, it wouldn't surprise me at all that they're having, yeah, those types of visions of what's possible, what's plausible, and seeing it in advance. Even, on the alien side of things, where I know who was I listening to on podcast the other day, where he talked about a number of years ago, two shamanic sermon holders were brought in and shown pictures of the Greys, for example, and they had a very specific name for them. And they're like, oh yeah, you got to be aware of those guys, to be careful because they can drag you down and drag your soul down, etc. And they would never been exposed to modern day media and the type of stuff that we would have had watching Star Trek, etc. So I think it's all connected. I don't know exactly how the I's are dotted and the T's are crossed, but I do know when I've my mastermind of these people that I reach out to across the globe who don't know each other, but um I have this guy in the Philippines called John, and like it's that man is gifted. Like he can tell me exactly what my business is going to do in the next 6 months. He can tell me if I should be working with somebody or not. He can tell me exactly what's going on with my health. He can see things that um 20 years ago I would have said this guy is just not possible that he's doing what he's doing, but he's doing what he's doing, and it's like in real terms he's tapped into something that I don't have access to. So I just smile and go, that's amazing what you can do. And I try not to get overly opinionated on it and just keep an open mind. So yeah, I don't know if that fully answers your question, but it's probably just asking more questions, really.
Right. That's the idea, right? The cascade of questions
Yeah.
from the right one. And it's funny because we were talking about the simulation stuff. Recently, depending on, of course, when you're listening, but recently, David Icke came out with a new book called Roadmap. And I had the pleasure of meeting David Icke a long time ago, maybe 10, 12 years ago. Fascinating person. and his stuff has been, yeah. I mean, as far as at the top of the conspiracy theory pyramid, he's at the very top of it. Most people would probably agree, and he's been chastised for some of his beliefs about reptilians and everything else. But I found that his most recent research in this book was so well put together that it's starting to make sense to me. The simulation and who's controlling it, and the Greys and reptilian, and what's going on in the media, and the cult of Luciferian devil worshippers in Hollywood that, run child sex trafficking rings. I mean, it gets pretty dark. We're seeing the stuff in the news and the media about Epstein and what actually was going on there, now that things have been, released and then redacted, and then found a way to hack into the redacted parts, and now you can read them, and it's pretty it's pretty interesting, and it makes the case for that we're living in the simulation more and more and more, and that we're being controlled and actually being fed upon, by something that we don't really know. I think this ties into what we're talking about today, because every time you look in the mirror and you think negative thoughts about yourself, that's energy. Energy can't be created or destroyed. Where does that energy go? It goes out from you. If thoughts are things like, in the Think and Grow Rich book, or in The Secret, where you start thinking about something and you create that reality, or you attract it magnetically to you, then the more that you think, the more you pay attention to your thoughts, that's either food for you, sustenance for you to consume, or it's sustenance for something else or someone else to consume. So I find it very fascinating, since we open up that conversation about the simulation and some other things. It's just some. I think you can never stop learning. I think the moment you stop learning is the time you start dying. A slow death, because you're not challenging yourself to think differently. Or you get so stuck in social media conversations, then pandering to the trolls who are either left or right, and they just can't see anything other than what they've been indoctrinated into. It's exhausting, to listen to those conversations, be part of them, but you feel so, at least I do, I feel so, I've got to make my point. I've got to get in there, and I got to educate these people, like, at least say something that's going to make them think a little differently. And maybe that's the purpose of us engaging in those things, is to just get us that anxiety and get us fighting against each other, like you made the analogy of your neighbors, until you have that existential threat or something else, otherworldly threat to unify against, or some other nation that's going to attack inevitably, or AI who's going to wipe out the human race, like in Terminator, or
Mm.
replace the human race, like in the movie AI a long time ago. If you watch one with the little boy in it,
Oh.
it's very interesting where we're headed.
What are your own thoughts on it?
What's that?
What are your thoughts on the threat of AI?
If I could sum it up, I would say AI is not coming for your job. It's coming for every job. It's coming for everything. And it's not that it even knows that it's coming for that. It's that the human nature of consumption is, I think, pressing that forward, and winning, because the countries that are trying to win at the AI arms race are never going to stop. Even when they win, they're never going to stop. And at some point in time, they'll create something that's not controllable anymore, that they feel like they can control it, or they think that they can put the brakes on it. But can you really? You can't. If you anyone who's gone up into the mountains, and when you drive back down from the mountain, at least in the United States, they probably have them in other places too, you'll see these like gravel pit roads off of the main highway. And those are there for one reason only, and that's for runaway tractor trailers, like the big hauling, whether they're hauling like timber, or, tens of thousands of pounds or tons of material. If they lose their brakes, they can't be stopped. The only thing that can stop them is going into that gravel, and hopefully, it stops them over time, but it's going to damage everything in its wake. There's just no stopping that locomotive at that point in time. And I think that's where we're headed. I think that people don't realize and they don't wake up, and I think it's inevitable at this point. I think people need to start thinking differently. They need to rethink everything about what's important to them. And this, what we're talking about today is not just about how you look; it's about how you feel, how you operate, how you value yourself, how you change the narrative from within at the cellular level. It's about becoming strong enough that no matter what wind blows you, you bend like a reed in the wind and you don't break, you don't snap, because there's going to be things thrown at us, I think, over the next 3 to 5 years that 80 to 90% of the population of the world is not ready to deal with. They're not going to be ready because they're not taking the time to figure the stuff out right now. They're focused on the thing that we're being told in the simulation that we should be focusing on. Earn more, make more, achieve more, buy more, consume more, so that you can earn more, achieve more. Because they say that the more money you make, the more money you spend. Well, then you got to make more money to spend more money, and then make more money to spend even more money. And I think that gets us into this very dangerous cycle of when one thing goes off the rails and that locomotive, hits the moment that it hits the pavement, and you realize there are no brakes anymore. Like there's only one thing that can stop it, and it's going to come to a complete halt. It doesn't slow itself down slowly and then you get control of it again. You completely lose control of it. And I think a lot of people are going to lose control. And it's going to put us into a place that if we don't raise our consciousness level and our vibration and start valuing things more importantly, like our humanity and the gift of life that we actually have in friendships, I think that we're going to be, that to me is the Chernobyl. That's the dangerous, a nuclear plant that's being built in our backyard is losing our ability to value the things that really matter. It's not even AI. I think AI is just the canary in the coal mine that's going to make everyone wake up at some point in time. I don't know. I have a lot of weird thoughts on this, especially with the pyramids, and like we've had this level of technology thousands of years ago that far surpass what we can do today. And with the recent discovery of possible like shafts and structures underneath the pyramids that have been talked about in for thousands of years in other texts, but we just somehow magically didn't believe it that happened. And they're not letting anyone dig down there to figure out what's actually down there. I think that history is being rewritten every single day, and what we think we knew, we don't know anything at all. No matter how technologically advanced we become. Ultimately, maybe that's the next level of the simulation. Like I used to play Zelda, the game's Legend of Zelda. When you won at the very end, instead of putting you into a new game, they actually just rearranged everything. So you had to go back and find where everything was at again. This was the very first, this will speak to my age, the very first version of the Zelda movie, game. So I thought it was very, very interesting. So I've got a bit of a bleak picture of AI at the moment, but there is a spark. There's a hopeful spark that I'm hoping that what we're doing here, and having these conversations can get people to rethink, get the people to think differently and value things differently, as opposed to getting stuck in that loop.
Okay, and you know what? We can all choose to be optimistic, or we could choose to be pessimistic. I'm deciding to choose to be optimistic because you could literally see this play out whatever way you want to, right? And I don't know will we either of us be alive when it runs its course, or not. But I think that a key point of being unbreakable is you talked about it. Is right, not being rigid, and you'll know like we started talking about six packs, right, at abs, and now we're talking about the existential threat that faces us. But here's the thing: I think the less rigid we are on our ideas, and the more open you are to holding all of these thoughts about completely different topics, and be able to just be able to tap into the conversation moving like this just in your day-to-day life will help you be way more flexible as things change. Because um again, the more I like dealing with, let's say, the other world, where people that have somehow have access and can tap into other things, um the more it makes sense to me. Like, I'll give you a personal example. When I asked this person who can connect to people when they pass away. I was asking about my mom when she passed away years ago. I said, "What did she think?" And he said, he asked a couple of questions. He went, "Oh," he said, "Well, the one thing I can tell you is she was shocked uh, at what it was because it was not at all what she expected, but not in a bad way." And I remember just smiling, and that is like the perfect. That's exactly what I would have expected. Is that she had a very rigid view of how it was going to be, and then it was nothing like that. But maybe she saw when she was there that, well, everything she was learning was just a storybook version, the Anne and Barry version of trying to explain to primitive people, what this actually is. And I don't declare that I'd be any better at doing that. But it's if we can just be flexible in the fact that this could go either way, but also every person's, I think, every view that we have, the more optimistic it is, I think the more we can tilt it in that direction. um and sometimes I feel guilty personally of thinking, well, I don't know if I have enough of an impact, or I don't know, will I make any difference? But that's a cop out. It's like, well, I do, right? I have more of an influential position than other people might have. So it's like, well, how do you use that? I think being less rigid in my views, and definitely not being trying to pontificate to people about, no, no, you're wrong with that. No, 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 you're wrong. It's not as simple. I've no idea if it is or not, but if we can be open to it, I think it allows us to be flexible. And then getting back to what we said at the very start, just start to control the controllables. Do the things that will make yourself feel happier today. What will make you feel happier tomorrow? What your future you at 85 years of age will thank you for doing now, regardless of what happens in the locus that's outside of our control. So yeah, I don't think I'd be as. I know you are quite negative in your view of it at the moment, but um, yeah, I can't disagree with that position. I think, yeah, I could definitely choose. I can see where you can have that perspective from at the moment.
Yeah, I think the danger is the algorithm, whether you're on social media or in world, the people you put around you, is going to typically echo back the things that you're putting out, more of that. So if you typically go down that negative route, you're going to see more negative things.
Yeah,
You're going to attract more of those negative comments and those people. If you be more on the positive side, you're going to be more on the positive side.
yeah,
Coming from a prepper background, right, in
yeah,
the survival space, I learned that, prepare for the worst and everything will work out, because it can only be better than preparing for the worst. But that doesn't mean losing yourself in the worst, and
agreed.
holing up in your underground bunker and, eating your own family and then coming out to realize that the world didn't end. That gets, pretty dark too if you lose yourself to the situation. But,
100%. Be
I,
prepared. Look, we've spoken about it. I mean, I'm fortunately, like yourself, have the means, but absolutely, I've a number of years ago I set up off the grid, bought a forest, bought a lake, bought a house. It's all there. I'd rather be prepared than um wrong, right? And I know some people just went all in on that, but um I think it's good to hedge your bets, right? Because we don't know. Like and the more certain somebody is about the future, the less kind of respect I have on that view. It's like, okay, unless they can convince me otherwise. But it's like it could swing it anyway. At the moment, now I know that goes against something I said earlier, where maybe all of our futures are already pre-written, um, which is of course another alternative view. But I'm okay with holding both those at the same time and seeing the conflict, but also going, all right, okay, I can swing between either depending on how I wake up that morning, I guess.
well, there's a reason why you're here and you don't remember those things.
Yeah,
If this is all a construct, whether you chose to be here, to play the game from the other side, you said, "Hey, I'm going to jump back into the game, guys. Put me back in, coach," and you go back into the game. Um, if you were supposed to retain those memories, you would have, or unless something else is preventing you from retaining those memories. Maybe there is, maybe there's not. That's the whole idea of like the overlords using us as sustenance and food, our fears and everything else, our struggles. But I mean, who knows? I'm the same with you on these things. Like, you know, who knows where this is going to end up at. But I do like, our conversation about if this is the only game and you're in the game, because obviously we're here, like if it's a matrix, if it's a simulation, like, okay, well, play the game. You know, so the question I have for you, Paul, is can you rewrite the game? while you're playing it. Because let's say that there's the predestined version of the game, which is uh, I like looking at the role playing games like Dungeons and Dragons, for example, where they're somewhat flexible, but there's still certain rules and there's still a certain amount of chance, with rolling the dice, and things can go one way or another. But you kind of navigate, the end result of like, this is the campaign we're on, this is the beast we're trying to slay, or the outcome we're trying to achieve. How we get there might take us 5 hours, it might take us 5 days. But ultimately we're going to try to get there and not lose everybody in the process. So if we're on this trajectory in this game that's been kind of pre-written for us, um, are there ways that you can see people changing the game? Uh, Maybe even stepping outside of the game altogether?
I would say yes. Uh, to the first part, stepping out of the game, I guess it depends on how you define the game. I mean, what do we know? You're born and you die. Right? That's the game at its crudest. And we don't know what happened before. We don't know what's happening after. With everything that we know, we don't know that. So everything within those parameters from birth to death, we all actually get to decide what parameters we're going to measure the fun and excitement and happiness and sadness with this emotional roller coaster of the game. Um, but most people are completely, I mean, I know you know this, but are completely unaware of one of the reasons why they're so miserable most of the time is because they don't have any targets set up for how they can win this game. They they know exactly when they're playing a computer game why it's so addictive. Then they know how to get the dopamine rush, the oxytocin rush, the serotonin rush, the endorphins, because there's clear parameters by which you are allowed to progress and you can be happy and you have the sense of fulfillment. You literally get to decide those parameters in your own life. So I went through my first 30 years of life following the, let's say, the academic and corporate game. So you have to achieve certain sets of results at high school. You got to get accepted into a certain college, and you have this sense of fulfillment in passing these results. You study hard to get to remember this stuff. It sounds so funny nowadays that that's what you're awarded for, remembering and regurgitation. Then you get accepted into a job where you accept the least amount of money for the and competing against other people who will work for the least for the longest, and that you're delighted, and then you start to compete against the people within this false reality, which was a building of, okay, there's 3,000 of us here, there's only room for one at the top, and there's a triangle, and now we're going to compete against each other to go all the way. And then at 30 years of age, I woke up, I was €500,000 in debt, I had an MBA, I was the youngest ever director in the corporation, and had done everything correctly. I had an MBA, a degree in industrial biochemistry, a diploma in chemical engineering, a project management professional, diploma in project management, a qualified financial advisor after that. Um, and that that was one of those moments when I realized I've played by the rules of the game, but this is not the outcome I was expecting at the end of the game. And that's when I started doing personal development and that type of thing, where they're going, well, who told you that the outcome of this game was being wealthy? I was like, shit, nobody. Nobody. That was my perception. I made up that rule that if I followed all these things, I would get rich. But if I even looked around for a moment, no one in there was rich. Nobody was. So you fall into this trap that is actually in many ways I created myself. No teacher, no lecturer, no boss told me I was going to be rich if I followed this path. But in my mind, that was the way to do it. So that was like a reset at 30 years of age, right? Let's start again, right? Because I'm going to reset the rules of the game. And maybe 5 years of that was very narcissistic, self-obsessed. It was all about the money, really. Ultimately, it was all about hitting these personal financial goals. And then I felt that everything else would fall into place. A certain amount of that is definitely true. But then at 35, I started, what I found really helped me was studying John D. Martini's work, where he gave this structure of the 7 areas of life: physical, financial, spiritual, social, mental, and vocational, and whatever the last one was: physical, financial, spiritual, social, mental, vocational, and familial. Those were the 7. And now I had buckets that, like, because okay, I'm chasing money and health, but it sounds so weird when you're saying it now, because you feel like, how did I not spot this at the time? Like, I was smart, I should have known these things. But um, that became ultimately for me rethink, relationships, earnings, Tao, health, investing, networks, knowledge, and fun, kind of the enlightenment when you master these. Um, but that gave me, exactly to your point, it gave me a set of a set of rules that I could now live by. It's like, right, there's these areas I can master one at a time. I can try to do them together, but now I could finally set specific targets by which I could measure success by. And I think that's why we love sports so much, is there's a clear finish line. There's a clear goal. Um, and again, I'm sure you've had many guests that will talk about this, but if you look at a football game or a soccer game, let's say a soccer game, and you take away the goals, what have you got? You've got 22 grown-up men in knee socks chasing a ball around the field. You add a goal and you've two goals, and you've got a multi-billion-dollar organization, and you've got fans on one side of a field willing to kill, like murder, and go to jail, other fans just because they're in a red jersey and they're in a blue jersey. So, if you don't have these goals, your life is not exciting. Right? No one wants to watch it, including yourself. And if you are the creator, the director, and also the actor in the play. Um, if you don't have any outcome that you're aiming towards, no wonder life feels listless and boring, and you start to pick up this device and you use it as your personal compass, because that becomes that decides where you're going to put your time, your energy, your focus, your money. I mean, think about it. When you wake up in the morning, what's the first thing that we do? We pick it up. And what happens if in a world where we say we're really divided, there's one thing we all do in unison across the globe, all 8 billion people, including the children. Every night we kneel down beside our beds, not to give thanks, not to pray, but to plug in our phones. But it's like, if you wake up in the morning and you don't have your phone charged, it's like a nightmare. It's like, you couldn't care less if your partner is charged in the morning, but if your phone isn't charged, it's a problem, right? Because that's determining what we are now perceiving as the game of life. It's the game of comparison. Why has this person got that? Why has this person got that? Instagram reels, TikTok, whatever it may be. So you completely get to set the rules of life. And I think that's why the likes of you and me and others do create followings, because we give versions of the game that people can relate to, and they go, oh, I get this, I like this. um and I say, look, here's some goals that we can aim for, and here's some targets that you can go for, and this is how you can go achieve them, and just watch what happens. Because one domino after the other, you start to thoroughly enjoy being the person that you're becoming on every step of the journey. Now, it takes time to fully buy into that, but what happen is, I find, is it's almost like gamers, right? You start resonating with gamers that like playing the same game, and others fall away. Even though you could be sitting around a table with 10 people, I always find it interesting that I'm not listening to the conversations, but then I know that these two people just said this thing that I'm interested in, whether it be stem cells or whatever, something that's caught my ear. You're very much attuned to people that are playing that game. So, it's important that, I mean, I know if someone is actually sitting and listening through this and watching it up until this point, you are definitely attuned to a different frequency to the average person. It doesn't make you any better, by the way, but it certainly allows you to step into this unbreakability, this ability to, no matter what comes at you. And like, we could go back to 2012, George, when people, it was the end of the world and blah blah blah, and then before that it was 2000. Like, it's not hard to find different times in history where you could say, perception wise, at that time it looked as bad as AI. You're right, but in retrospect, we don't think it is. Oh, this is the worst. But that's what we've always said, right? So I do think, if I totally believe in what George is doing with this idea of focusing on you. How do you make yourself unbreakable, regardless of what happens? I mean, for some people, the idea of hell on earth is AI utopia, as is being painted, that no one's ever going to have to work again, right? The whole idea of money will become irrelevant, because we'll be completely abundant. I mean, there's a lot of people that, and I'm talking about wealthy people, that suddenly won't know what to do with themselves, because all of their significance will have been taken away from them, where they're no longer been measured by the number of Ferraris, or the number of properties, or the number of houses, or how much cash is in the bank, or where they are on the Forbes wealthy list. So um, it, whichever way you look at it, it's your personal perspective, and the game that the rules that you're setting, I think, will allow you to enter this in a mindset that whichever way it goes, you're completely ready for either way. And like I say, I know George and I we're prepped one way or the other, right? And then likewise, you need to be flexible nowadays, even in business, right? It's the model. Who knows what it's going to be like in a few years, especially in the education space and so on. Will anybody want to learn anymore? Why would you even need to know if AI already knows, for example? So you got to become comfortable with this sense of unease of how quickly things are changing nowadays.
Mm-hmm. So become comfortable with being uncomfortable, kind of.
Yeah.
If you had to go back and change the game, or maybe give advice to your 20-year-old self, right? After you've had a couple of years out of school and try to figure a few things out, um, or even like giving the advice to somebody now who is a younger generation who's just now coming to this new phase, like what would you tell them about the road ahead?
Well, in many ways, I don't know much more in the road ahead than they do. But what I would advise myself would be, one, listen more, speak less. That's just a good starting point. But then, more importantly, is who you're listening to. Um, I would think probably it's a lot more valid than it was even 20 years ago when I was that age. Um, is seek out actively both sides of the argument. Um, the ability to critically think is gone. Like, it is gone. We have never been taught it in school. It certainly is not going to be added back into the curriculum anytime soon. And I think most people, Generation Z and after that, completely do not understand the idea of critical thinking. They confuse it with group thinking of, oh no, we're told to think this, so this is critical because we're critical of them. No, no, it's not about being critical of others. It's literally to be able to debate yourself and take the point, and then take the opposite point and argue both cases evenly. Um, I think if you were able to do that as a 20-year-old, it will help you an enormous amount. I would also strongly encourage to take time out and really think about what you want. With basic questions like, if you had all the money in the world, what would you really want to do? How would you really want to spend your day? And also in doing that, like in bold at the top, saying, this is me as a 20-year-old. And then I would ask yourself, now do your best at doing this as a 30-year-old. Now do your best at doing this as a 40-year-old. Because I mean, honestly, there was a point in college when I was drinking so much, I didn't think I'd live past 30. It was like, okay, I've got 10 years left. Let's go at it hard. Let's live my best life. And it was Celtic Tiger times in Ireland. So, there was money everywhere, etc., until there was none. Um, but if I'd had the foresight to think, well, I'm going to be a completely different human being at 30 and again at 40 and again at 50, um, I would make very different decisions at that point in time. Like, I don't know when I first went to the gym, but I do think the kids nowadays are a lot more aware, let's say, of their fitness and health. Right? They definitely don't drink as much. They definitely exercise more. Um, but they also seek escapism in other ways now, like through recreational drugs, etc., etc. Um, and I'm not going to come down on you and say you should not do that, but do some research as to, what are the longer term impacts of doing something like that. Um, Anything you've got a really rigid view on, anything, whether that be immigration or whatever it might be, the topic of choice, around Gaza, around Ukraine, um, just play with the idea of arguing it from the other perspective, and really getting into that way of thinking. I just think you'll mature so much faster. You'll be listened to a lot more, and you will elevate up the ranks uh, a lot faster than you would otherwise, because there's huge wisdom in that, in appreciating things from both sides. And I guess that for my younger self, that would be one of the key things I'd love to have known a little bit sooner.
Yeah, I think that's a really good insight, you know, because people want to be around, they want to do business with, they want to be, in relationships with people who are interesting and have something to say that's not parroting what everyone else is just saying. It's not regurgitating the narrative that everyone else is putting back out there. I think that's what makes me find like that's what I find interesting with certain people. I like to find people who think differently than me, have different set of experiences, and then you know uh, find out what and ask the questions that no one asks. I went to music school, and I asked one of my teachers when we started because we were spending like a lot of money on private lessons, and I remember walking in my first lesson, and I said, "Okay, I don't want to talk about drums today. I want to talk about what books are you reading?" And he was just totally taken aback. He's like, "No one's ever asked me that." I'm like, "I'm curious. I want to know who you are before I want to learn from you. I want to know who you are." And this is like me at 20 years old or something like that,
Nice.
right? I just
Yeah.
wanted to think differently, right? And and that started a great friendship. And it also took me down a road because I got a couple books that he was reading. I think it was Celestine Prophecy, Course in Miracles, and something about a book from Emmanuel or something like that. So 3 books that were totally spiritual. I had no idea what they were, and I'm like, cool, I'm going to go get those books and read them, so I can understand this person better. At least at the point in time in life where I'm making a connection with that person, I want to understand where they're at so I can get the most out of that relationship and we can have interesting things to talk about and not the stuff that everyone else discusses. Like a bit of a pattern interrupt, and that's what makes you memorable to people
Mm,
is when you can interrupt the pattern and you're unpredictable.
mm.
So I find that a very interesting way of looking at things. I'd like to get back into your transformation now. Because I know there's people who are like, all right, so how did we get
It
into the
seems so minor.
reptilians?
It seems so
Yeah.
minor on the scale of things.
So, but again, I like to talk about the stuff that no one else talks about.
Yeah.
Um, where did you learn this from? Because you went for years and you've been on stages, you've met some of the most influential people, you've been to Tony Robbins events. Like I would have thought that you would have heard about this way of making this transformation to find out that key, the secret formula, what that would look like way sooner than you did. So I'm curious where you found it, how you stumbled upon this process, who you learned it from. And I'd like to get into some of the protocols because we touched on very briefly about some of the changes, like going counterintuitive to what you thought you were supposed to do. But I want to go more granular into that for those who are like, I need to make that transformation. I want to know what I'm getting into before I get into this.
Sure, sure, sure. Um, so the big thing for me was seeing, like so many others have, a before and after picture of somebody, but somebody I knew. His name was Dan Martell, a Canadian entrepreneur, big into SaaS. I met Dan for the first time, actually the only time in person in Las Vegas at an event we were speaking at in 2015. And so we were connected on Facebook, and just one day he put up the post of the before and after. As I whoa, okay, and he said, I think the next day or a couple of days after, DM me, if you're interested in finding out more. Um, and I did, and I knew from the follow up on the messages it wasn't Dan. It was the trainer behind Dan, and his name was Alan Dick, Dyck, who was bodybuilder shape. Like he looked from the outset like the a prime bodybuilder. And he asked a couple of questions. Um, was I serious and blah blah blah. Standard stuff. And I said it was. And he said, okay, here's the link to pay. And I think it was 3 months. It was like 3 months. I paid like $1,200, something like that, for 3 months. I know now they don't do 3 monthly programs; it's all annual. But um, that was it. I remember thinking that was expensive. For a virtual program. He was based in Canada. And then okay. This was I mentioned it earlier. This was April 24. Day one when I started, I went over on my ankle, and I was like, shit, right? Because that really put me back. I mean, my ankle went to. I have a picture of it there, but and because I'm stubborn, I don't stop my jogging habit, right? So I'm jogging on the ankle, so that's going to take me longer to recover. So it takes me anyway till September till I'm ready, right? So I'm doubly motivated because most people, I think, when they're starting a program, like excited, but they're also like, oh, this is going to take work. But I was doubly excited because I wasn't able to work out for that period of time when I was injured. So I was actually very grateful that I was in the condition, even as a 6 months pregnant. Look, I was still able to go. I was able to get started, and um, so from day one, you're given your eating protocol. You start off with a cleanse for 16 days. Alan's tagline is, as Alan Dick is his name, his tagline was "Trust the Dick." So whatever he said, just trust the Dick. You're like, all right, okay, I'll trust the Dick, which is brilliant. You're not going to forget that. So in the cleanse, I mean, I was dropping very quickly. I was dropping weight. I was dropping body fat, um, very fast. And then after that, you move into a specific calorie count, specific exercises that you do, whether depending on how much exercise you already do, you either do 4, 5, or 6 times a week. And he, as he says himself openly, he doesn't know how long it's going to take you to get to the point. But the first objective, once you get through the cleanse, is to get into the next phase. Phase two was to strip all the fat. And basically, it's like you found an old masterpiece potentially, but you have to scrape all the dirt and dust off to see what does it actually look like. What have you done by yourself up until now? So because you're not putting on any muscle during this period because you're in calorie deficit. So he said that's what we got to first of all is the unveiling. Find out. Let's go, and you go to a point where you're never going to go back to again because like it's the lightest you're ever going to be, and like a lot of people say that it's got to haven't been this light since I was a teenager. But you see what you've already done. So what it was, I guess, fantastic about my result was the work that I've been doing in the gym, which I'd never seen the benefit of, uh, suddenly became obvious when the layers of fat came off. Like there was actually muscle there somewhere. It was just really, really well hidden, and that took 7 months for me. So for others, it could have been faster. It could have been less, and then I can walk you through in whatever detail you want at that point as to how I got there. But as we got closer to the point, so Alan, we have a call every week. He would take a look at your photos. And basically, what he was looking for is when you were 2 weeks away from what he would call peak condition, he gave you an option of doing a photo shoot protocol. Now, my natural instinct was to be very averse to that. I was like, geez, what kind of narcissist would need pictures of themselves? But he convinced me. He said, "Is there anything that you could use photos for?" He said, "Like think about your wedding. It was really a strong motivation factor." And I said, "Yeah, well, I'm going to be writing a book on habits." And he's like, "Come on, like, do I need to explain this to you? Like, this is what's going to sell the book. Use." I said, "Oh shit, okay, that's obvious." So the reason why I bring that up is and I was excited because it was something I'd never heard of before or never done before. But in the lead up to the photo shoot, he did what was called a water pump protocol. So you load up on water in the lead up to it, and then you release it all, so that when it's the day of the photo shoot, you are like your competition ready. Like you actually look like a superhero, like you mentioned. It's just unbelievable. Your everything is just popping. Your veins that you've never seen before in your whole life. You're actually looking at yourself, like my Tony Robbins experience. Going, who is the person I'm looking at in the mirror? Um, and then from there, the most important part is what you do after that is now starting to load up and add more muscle on over time and doing it slowly. You can lose weight a lot faster, as he said, but what he'd prefer to do is you lose it slower so your skin adapts, everything tightens up more, so that when you're at that point, you don't have a lot of flab hanging. It's like your body is your waistline adjusts to it. And I mean, men, women, all ages. I mean, there was guys in their 70s there, just like phenomenal results. The only thing I would say uh, about it was the people, the clients were very well off, because you need to be in order to make that investment, let's say. But one day, we used to have Dan one week and we'd have Alan the next week. So Dan used to do mindset one week and Alan would do health stuff the second week. And Dan came on a few months in and said, by the way, if any of you want to, well, he actually asked, how many of you would love to teach others what you do and the journey you've been on and actually share exactly what you've done? And obviously lots of people were interested. And he said, well, he said, bar the cleanse piece, which Alan had the kind of particular, it was his, he designed it. He said everything else you're free to go and teach others exactly what you did, teach the protocols exactly as they were, but just change up the cleanse. I was like, wow, okay, well, that's pretty amazing, because even my own team at work were asking, what the hell are you doing? I was like, well, this is Alan, this is the guide, here's the link, go sign up. And Alan's prices were going up. It was then $50,000 to work with him for the year, because his value is skyrocketing with the results he was getting. Um, so that was when I said, let's see, could I enroll my own team of 10 to see could they do it. And funnily enough, it was basically all booked out by 7 staff members and 3 other speakers, who all were like so eager to kind of replicate my kind of result on it. But yeah, so it was it starts off with a big cleanse for 16 days per the Allen protocol, then calorie deficit all the way down until you get to this kind of bottom point. But you're eating 5 times a day, right? So you don't feel that it's a calorie deficit. For a lot of people, actually, like myself, where I was only eating twice a day and in a small window, I felt it almost difficult to eat that often. But yeah, the transformation was just unbelievable when you combine the exercise, less cardio, and just eating less but eating more regularly. It took time, but suddenly, as I said, you don't see anything week on week. But when you compared month on month, and then to what happens at the very end, it's just quite phenomenal, actually. I was like, oh, finally, I've got this. I can complete the book on habits now, because I just hadn't mastered health.
When you talk about the cleanse, I know there are certain restrictions you can't kind of explain. Maybe you could explain a little about what the cleanse was like, or what cleanse you would suggest people to take at this point in time without giving away uh, the Dick's secrets.
Oh yeah, yeah, sure. And I'm sure, but if you reach out to him directly, he'd have no problem sharing it with you individually. But um, it's fairly rigorous. In the first couple of days, it's basically just liquid, right? Combination of tomato juices and grapefruit juice, no coffee, that type of stuff is all cut out. Um, and then slowly after a few days, you add back in some proteins, and coffee, but you're definitely at a fairly regimented calorie deficit. I'll actually, let's say 800 calories in or around that, and you remain at that more or less for the 2 week period. And the best part about it, really, for me, was it was aligned with how I stick to habits and counting habits. Was that if you miss a day, you got to go back to the start. Like, he was ruthless. So even on day 14 and you mess it up, you got to go back and start again. Um, but the best part is when you've done it once, you're never going to have to repeat it to completion again. But also, what I found really useful with working with Alan, and still do, is it's based around real life. Because I say, well, what happens if I go out this weekend, or what happens if I'm going out for dinner late, or what happens if I have to eat past a certain hour? There are protocols that you can pull in for any particular versions of those. There's a holiday protocol. What do you do when you're going on holidays? Like simple things that I was never aware of before. I'll just give you some tips. Like if you're going, let's say you're on holidays and you're going to have alcohol and you're going to be going out. So on a particular day, you should stop having water at midday, right? Completely the opposite of what you'd expect. No carbs past noon, because the alcohol consumption will make up for the carbs. And then the next morning you would do a fasted cardio, which means you'll burn off any excess alcohol that was in your system first thing the next morning. And I just loved that. I was like, okay, you're not pretending to yourself that you're going to be a good boy forever. It's actually, no. If you know you're going to be doing this, you plan in advance, and this is exactly how you cater for those scenarios. And there's cheat days built in and all that type of stuff. And it's funny because that's what a lot of people's challenges are. They don't want to cheat because they feel it's going to send them backwards. And it's like, trust a dick. You got to follow exactly the protocol, because 100% it works. But for me, what the most incredible thing out of all of it was, for me, was it took 7 months to get to that first photo shoot. And then I started to build muscle for the next four, or let me see, in May, June, July, August, 4 months. And that's when we did our first mini cut. So that's when you're kind of checking, where you're at now after eating more. And by the way, I got up to eating 2,750 calories per day, which was just so much food for me. And this is what most people can't understand, is that you're going to be eating way more than you think. So it's exactly the opposite of what you think. You're actually going to have to eat more than you're eating now. You're going to be in amazing shape. Your body just becomes a furnace, so it just burns it off. You can have a cup fall off the wagon for a couple of days, and your body will recover within a couple of days, and it'll just drop it back to where you were. Um, but when I did that first mini cut, it took me just 4 days to drop from 12% body fat, which is where I was at then, to 3.7% and photo shoot ready. So what took the guts of a 7 months the first time took just 4 days the second time. And that's like, wow, I've got like a permanent solution here to the health problem that I've been facing over and over. So um, for me, it's amazing because it's like one box permanently ticked. It's like, right, I don't need to worry about this anymore because I have a protocol. It's dialed in. It's always priority for me. Um, there's like built-in safety nets in the event that life happens, which of course it will. And yeah, I mean, I think I've pretty much given everything else a decent go, but if finally I've got this, and by the way, I don't cook. I'm not one of those people that cooks or any of that. So even with that, those limitations, there's okay. I do boil rice. I've figured that bit out. Um, but you do not need to be a chef or a cook of any. You do need to prep. You do need to be organized, but that's completely different to being able to cook.
So how has it been as far as maintaining? You talk about building muscle and everything else. Like this is future pace as you've been going along, and maybe even further into the future. Like, what does it look like on a daily basis, routine wise, habit wise, that people might need to change so that they can maintain and grow from where they're at?
Yeah. So the secret of it is that every one of us has a different amount of calories that you can take where your body will burn it off. And when you just go about 100 calories over that, you are going to like explode weight wise. And I think we kind of know that inherently or intuitively, but we never know what that number is because most people say, oh, I don't bother with counting. So what's really amazing on the growth phase is like, okay, you've got to that point where you're super slim, super skinny, and you're hangry too, right? You're at this false state. You're not, and you're warned in advance. This is not how you're going to look all the time. Like even bodybuilders have to prep for a show to look in show state, but now you have it. But now you get, but you're always going to look good, but you're not necessarily going to be at 3%. It's just very difficult to sustain unless you're on all forms of performance enhancing drugs, etc. But um, you grow, you add. I'll speak as a man my size. I start back on 1,700 calories. And what you do is, I mean, you're strikingly going to go up in weight because you've been water fasting as well. So suddenly your weight will go up by a few pounds. Um, and you get nervous because you're watching and oh my god, it's just ever going to stop, right? Because you're used to it going down, now it's going up. Well, what happens is even at 1,700 mark is you'll go up, it'll flatten. Let's say for 3 days you'll weigh the same, and then it'll drop. It'll drop almost all the way back to where you were, and that's when it's time to go up to the next level, which in, let's say in my case, would be 1,850 calories. And you go 1,850, boom, out it goes. It goes above where the previous weight was. Again, you're getting nervous, going, oh my god, it's just going to rocket up. No, suddenly it'll plateau for 2-3 days, and then it drops. It'll drop all the way back down, maybe about 1 pound to 1.5 pounds higher than where you started. Then you add on another 150 calories. Same plateau, up, across, down. Add 150 up, across. So I went all the way from 1,700 to where I was with 2,750 with two cheats. I'm telling you, this was cheat day. I'm like, I got to sit down and have a Viennetta ice cream. Just to, like you feel like you're almost the thing that you think you could never have again becomes the thing that you actually don't even want, because that's how your body is. You've literally trained yourself to become this burning oven. There's ladies on the program with me that are eating 2,600, 2,700 calories per day, It's just amazing. They're like, I can't believe this. I'm eating more than my husband. I look fantastic. I've never been in better shape. I'm lighter than I've ever been. Um, so it's just complete rethink of what I thought would have to happen, right? That you permanently have to be super healthy. You permanently have to be, on top of all these things. You'd have to give up drink completely, etc. And the irony of all this is I'm back on sugar now. I'm back on bread. I'm back on cheese. All these things I took out of my diet, I'm now eating on a regular basis because that was not the protocol to make me the way I ended up being. It's like no problem having those things in there, alcohol, whatever it might be as well. Um, so you go all the way up until you find that number where you want to stay at that, and you're slowly building muscle. You generally, I think you said you're aiming for 5 to 6 pounds per year of muscle. So you're doing it slowly, and over a period of years you grow to. And the thing is, I know my line on this was, oh, I don't want this bulking thing. I'd be happy just being skinny and muscly. Like that was always my line. I know I'm okay with that. I just want to maintain that. But the point is, after 40, we all lose muscle. So if you're not building it, even if you're just maintaining it, you're actually dropping. So we actually have to be adding muscle to our body makeup just to fight age. So my immature view of bulking, etc., was exactly that. I was like, well, hang on, now you're at a point now where you actually have to add this muscle if you want to. Like I always say to people, I'm going to live till 140 and have done for years. So it's like, well, me more than anyone, if you really want to live that out, you got to be adding muscle. If you want to be vibrant, you want to be healthy, you want to be living longer and fully have all your faculties going. Um, this is how you do it. So that's what you do. So it's different for every person. The makeup of the what you eat, etc. You get a choice in each meal, like 3 different options of the calorie count ends up being the same, but it'd be different for females versus males, and then it's also different depending on your weight as a female or your weight as a male, as to the numbers, the exact numbers, and the exact makeup of that.
How do you find the calorie magic ratio? Like what's like if you don't inherently like intuitively know that, because some people are like, I've tried to fast, I've tried to diet, and I can't see, I don't know what that number is. How do you find what that number is? Is there an equation for it based on like body mass or
Um,
something?
yeah, there actually is an equation. That This is pre doing anything on this program. I know I had looked at that before when I was trying to get into shape before. There are equations you can look at online where it will calculate for you. I mean, there's a rough one where you can, even on the Omron scales, it gives you is it BMR? Let me just pull it up. Uh, which will give a rough estimate of it. Your BMR gives you, like, for example, it says mine today was 1,584 calories, which is quite low. Um, but I know that varies all the way up to 2,200, 2,300 for me, depending on how much weight I'm on. But there is an equation. I mean, I can look it up and put it in the notes later, where people can calculate that. Because then, depending on how much they want to lose and how fast they want to lose it, they eat a calorie count that's a percentage of that. Um, but I would say generally for males is probably 2,200, 2,300 and upwards of that. Um, Mine is a little bit lower than that, but now it's I'm now on a regrowth phase where I'm just on 1,700, then I'll be 1,850, then I'll be 2,100, and then I'll be scaling up. So by in a month from now, I'll be up at 2,700 calories, which is just crazy,
What
and
does it
still
work?
maintaining shape.
What does the workout routines look like? Because I noticed when I made a big shift not long ago where I decided to go nomadic. I decided to be one of those guys that bought an RV and I was just going to do this thing because I told and preached for so long that you can run an internet business from an RV,
Yeah,
off the grid. I'm like, I didn't feel authentic, so I said, well, the hell with it, I'm going to do it, right? So I did it, and I could tell you over the last 2 years, I've been more in shape. I've been feeling better. I've been healthier
yeah.
than I've ever been in my life. And one of the things I attribute that to is taking showers at the gym. It forced me to go to the gym,
Oh yeah.
and actually I felt guilty by going to the gym just to take a shower. I felt, like it just didn't feel right, right? So I started actually doing quick workouts, and I found that the quick workouts, like literally less than 15 minutes, 10 minutes sometimes, and I would rep lower amounts of weight, like 3 sets of 12 reps at like something that wasn't going to be like at the very end, I'm like, struggling, nothing like that, you know? And I put on a lot more muscle and I just feel better. Like, I'm curious, what does the workout routine look like for this program?
Yeah, so again, it'll depend what phase you are in. So I mean, in the beginning when you're in the cleanse phase, um, it's, you're not meant to push yourself too much because you could be a little bit lightheaded anyway from being low on calorie count, etc. So it's, let's say it's more higher reps on the way down in weight, and then on the way up the reps will be less but heavier. Um, but it's like it's all in the nuance of how you do the lift. Like it's quite unbelievable, really, like the difference. But a lot of guys in gyms are constantly going from one injury to the next, and it's very reassuring. For example, when Alan, as a massive guy, competitive bodybuilder, when he'll, say, like, he'd much, when he's doing, for example, biceps, he'll he'll be using 20-pound biceps even though he could lift 100-pound biceps. He's like, that's ego, that's significance. Like, forget that. You go lighter and you go longer and you do it properly, full extension, slow. And that's what he encourages every single one of us. Whatever exercise it is, do it slower, do it safer, follow through. Stop trying to beat records by swinging, and because you see so much of that in the gym. It's just, it's more about, if you start lighter, you'll progress faster, and technique over numbers all day long. And it's kind of there's nothing spectacularly different, I would say, except two things. In that, it's different parts of the body on different days of the week. You generally have one day off if you exercise as much as me. But what was the second thing I was going to say on that? Um, that it's different parts of the body. He would suggest going lighter for sure. What'll come to me? What Doing a warm-up set every time. I hate it. You're not big into stretching at all, but definitely doing a warm-up set before you do each one. Oh yeah, that's what it was. Straps. Using straps. Gym Reapers is a particular brand where there's like hooks at the end of them, and they are a game changer. I mean, George, I recommend you get them today, right? So there's hooks at the end of them. They're little skeletons on the brand. But the reason why most of us get injured is, let's say if you're doing even a bicep curl, is it's the tension that you're putting on your hands and your wrists, as you're holding on really tight. That's what's creating the issues of the tennis elbow, etc. So when you have the hooks take the weight off the hand and actually put the weight on the muscle that there's meant to be. So whether it's a deadlift, whether you're doing a lat pull down or whatever it might be, the hook is taking the tension off the hands, the wrists, the elbows, and the actual lat will take the pressure. That's been massive. Um, in terms of, and I can see how that will work in terms of longevity also, is not only are you going slightly lighter, but then you're also using the muscles correctly, as opposed to, like, I've very, very thin arms and always have done, since I was a teenager. So the weights that I'm lifting are much heavier than they should be on my joints, until I started using these straps. And yeah, in the first couple of weeks you're like, oh, you feel like you look like an idiot, and then a couple of weeks later people are asking advice. Geez, where did you get them? Why do you use them? People start to get inquisitive when they see how you look and what you're doing differently to them. And of course they think it's the straps, but it's a
It's
bit
always
more
the
than the
thing that you
straps.
can buy, right? It's the mystery of Amazon.
Yeah.
Um, so I know a lot of people are probably now thinking like, okay, well, you've talked a lot about this protocol. Like, how do I get access to this?
Yeah.
Maybe you
So
talk a
I'll
little
just
bit
a
about
couple of
that.
options. It depends on your budget, right? If you want to work with Alan directly, please do. Like, go to Instagram. Alan Dick is his name, DYCK. Alan. So what happened at the end of the first year of working with Alan and Dan Martel was, Alan bought his company off of Dan. So Dan sold that element onto Alan, and Alan does his own thing now with his own brand new protocols. So if you want to work directly with Alan, which I do now, I suggest you go to Instagram. You can tell him I sent you there, or George sent you, and he'll go through his offerings with you. What I've created was based off of the protocol that I used exactly, with Dan and Alan when I started, and the one we were given permission to share with others. Um, I've done it in a way that's more budget conscious. because Dan has the kind of, let's say, higher end financial entrepreneurial people, a lot of mine are at the startup phase of business, and they genuinely are trying to choose between money for Facebook ads or money for health products. So I'm like, okay, well, so that's what I've designed with a personal friend of mine who's been a personal trainer for 30 years. Um, we've done our own variation of the protocol to keep it as exactly as to what I did, but we not having the cleanse the same as the way Alan did, to respect what Alan's request was around that. So that's also available. We can have a link in the chat below, or in the notes if people are interested in that. Well, basically how it works, George, is it starts with a call. People have to book a call for $50 with Dave, and Dave will take you through whether it's a fit or not. And if it's not, he'll give you a protocol that you should follow for the next year. And if it is, he welcome you in and bring you on board and say how many days a week you should work out, etc. Because it's pointless having someone join that's not going to do this. Because we've 100% success rate so far, and we want to keep that. So we keep the group small so that Dave personally works with each person, and so that they can mimic the results. And it's open to all ages, all sizes. But you gotta have a commitment to being unbreakable, right? That you're going to do this. Of course, it's tough in the beginning. You're eating differently, you're exercising differently, but if you want different results, you got to do different things.
Absolutely. And I was been waiting for our interview to basically raise my hand and say, I'm in.
Okay.
I'm going to do it. So hopefully people will be able to go along with me on my journey as well. I might have a 4-month pregnant. Maybe I'm not quite to 6 months, but I've got 4 months going for me. But this has been great. And for those who want to follow your other work, Paul, I mean, how would they go about learning more about Rethink Academy and some of the other stuff you do?
Yeah, well, our main website is rethinkacademy.com. If you want to follow me, I'm on Instagram at rethinkhq for headquarters, rethinkhq. Twitter I use personally most often. It's just my name, Paul O'Mahony, all one word. There's no E in honey. I'm not your honey. So it's Paul O'Mahony, ONY. And Facebook, it's Paul O'Mahony Speaker. We have a million people in there on the Facebook page. So yeah, I'm not massively active on social media, but if you do join my list, I do email regularly and give people all sorts of options depending on what challenges they're looking to conquer, whether it be relationships, earnings, Tao, health, investing, networks, knowledge, or fun.
I love it. Thanks so much, Paul. And we'll see everybody on the next session.
Thanks, George.
If you've been waiting for a sign to finally reset to get your foundation solid, this is it. Join our 3-day online Unbreakable Bootcamp to help you build strength across your mind, your body, your emotions, and your finances. You can go to unbreakable.bootcamp.com right now and register while it's still free, or click the link in the description. Again, that's unbreakable.bootcamp.com.